The hammer came down hard on the anvil, and Ophelia Thornton's arms trembled with the effort of shaping the horseshoe that glowed orange in the dim light of her makeshift forge. Knowing that tomorrow morning she would face another round of ranchers who would take one look at her calico dress and tell her that shoeing horses was men's work in this dusty corner of Chico, California, in the summer of 1882. She had been trying for 3 months to find work as a farrier, ever since her father had died and left her with nothing but his tools and the skills he had spent 15 years teaching her. But every rancher, every stable owner, every cowboy with a lame horse had turned her away with variations of the same dismissive words. The sun beat down mercilessly on the small shed behind the boarding house, where Ophelia rented a cramped room that cost more than she could afford. She was 22 years old, alone in a town that seemed determined to starve her out of existence, and desperately running through the last of her savings. Her father, Thomas Thornton, had been one of the best farriers in 3 counties before consumption had taken him in the spring, leaving Ophelia with knowledge that no one would let her use and debts that followed her like shadows. She set down her hammer and wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of ash across her pale skin. Her dark blonde hair was tied back in a practical bun, though several strands had escaped to stick to her neck in the oppressive heat. California summers were unforgiving, and the inside of her shed felt like the mouth of hell itself when the forge was burning. But she kept practicing, kept perfecting her craft, because what else could she do? Sewing paid pennies, laundry work barely covered room and board, and she had spent too many years learning the subtleties of hoof care and metal work to simply abandon it all. A knock on the shed door startled her out of her thoughts. She was not expecting anyone, and most of the boarding house residents avoided her workspace because of the heat and noise. Ophelia crossed to the door and pulled it open, squinting against the bright sunlight that flooded in. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of weathered leather. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty boots, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, and a hat that had seen better days. He looked to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days' worth of stubble. There was something steady about his presence, something that reminded Ophelia of the old oak trees that dotted the California landscape, rooted and unmovable. "Are you the woman who is trying to work as a farrier?" he asked, his voice deep and measured, carrying a slight drawl that suggested he had grown up somewhere in Texas before drifting west. Ophelia straightened her shoulders, preparing herself for another rejection. "I am. My name is Ophelia Thornton. My father trained me since I was 7 years old. I know my trade." The man studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "My name is Benjamin Xavier. I run a spread about 5 miles north of town. I heard about you from the clerk at the general store. And you have come to tell me that no man would hire a woman to shoe horses," Ophelia said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "I have heard it before." Benjamin shook his head slowly. "No, madam, I came to make you an offer." Ophelia felt her heart skip a beat. "An offer? I have 23 horses on my property," Benjamin said. "They all need regular care, and my last farrier moved to Sacramento 3 months ago. I have been doing basic maintenance myself, but I am no expert, and I need someone who knows what they are doing. I do not care if that someone is a man or a woman, as long as the work is done right." It sounded too good to be true. Ophelia narrowed her eyes, searching his face for signs of mockery or ulterior motives. "Why would you hire me when no one else will?" Benjamin met her gaze steadily. Because I judge people by their skills, not their skirts. My mother raised me and my two brothers by herself after my father died in a stampede. She ran our ranch in Texas for 12 years before selling it and retiring to live with my aunt. I learned early that women are just as capable as men when given the chance. Ophelia felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had been carrying for so long that she had forgotten it was there. "What are you offering?" "Steady work," Benjamin said. "Shoe mine every single month, regular as clockwork, and I will pay you fair wages. $3 per horse, which comes to $69 a month. That is more than most hands make, but good hoof care is worth it. If you do quality work, I will also recommend you to other ranchers in the area. A word from me carries weight around here." $69 a month would change everything. Ophelia could pay off her father's debts, afford proper food, maybe even save enough to open a real shop instead of working out of a shed. But years of rejection had made her cautious. "I want to be clear about something," she said, lifting her chin. "I am offering honest work, nothing more. If you are expecting anything else, I am not," Benjamin interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "I need a farrier, Miss Thornton. That is all. You would work during daylight hours, and my ranch hands will be around if you need assistance moving equipment or handling difficult horses. Everything will be proper and professional." Ophelia searched his face again and found only sincerity. She had developed a good instinct for reading people during her months of disappointment, and everything about Benjamin Xavier suggested he was exactly what he appeared to be, an honest rancher in need of an honest worker. "When do I start?" she asked. A smile touched the corners of Benjamin's mouth, the first break in his serious expression. "Tomorrow morning, if you are willing. I can come by at dawn with a wagon to help you transport your tools." "I will be ready," Ophelia said, and felt a genuine smile cross her own face for the first time in months. Benjamin tipped his hat to her. "Until tomorrow, then, Miss Thornton." He turned and walked away, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust from the dry ground. Ophelia watched him go, wondering if her luck had finally changed, or if this was just another disappointment waiting to reveal itself. But she pushed the negative thoughts aside and returned to her forge with renewed energy, preparing her tools for the next day's work. That night, Ophelia could barely sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and running through everything she knew about hoof care, trying to anticipate what she might encounter. What if Benjamin's horses had been neglected for 3 months? What if there were abscesses or cracks or laminitis? What if she made a mistake on her first day and he changed his mind about hiring her? But when dawn broke and she heard the rattle of wagon wheels outside the boarding house, Ophelia forced her nerves aside and carried her heavy tool chest down the stairs. Benjamin was waiting exactly as he had promised, sitting in the driver's seat of a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 dappled gray horses. "Good morning, Miss Thornton," he said, hopping down to help her load the tool chest. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," Ophelia lied, not wanting to admit that she had been awake half the night with anxious thoughts. Benjamin lifted the heavy chest as if it weighed nothing and secured it in the back of the wagon. Then he offered Ophelia his hand to help her up onto the seat. His palm was calloused and warm, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. Ophelia settled onto the wooden bench beside him, very aware of the propriety of the situation. In town, an unmarried woman sitting beside an unmarried man might cause gossip, but heading out to work on a ranch was different. This was business, nothing more. The ride out to Benjamin's property took about 45 minutes. The landscape around Chico was beautiful in its own harsh way. Golden hills dotted with oak trees, fields of dry grass that rustled in the morning breeze, and the distant mountains rising up against a sky that was already turning a brilliant blue. Benjamin did not talk much during the ride, but the silence was comfortable rather than awkward. Ophelia appreciated that he did not feel the need to fill every moment with empty chatter. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Ophelia felt her breath catch. She had expected something modest, but Benjamin's spread was impressive. A well-built ranch house stood at the center, constructed of solid timber with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Beyond it were a large barn, several corrals, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and various other outbuildings. Everything was well maintained and organized, suggesting Benjamin ran a tight operation. "I inherited the property from my uncle 4 years ago," Benjamin explained, noticing her expression. "He was my mother's brother, never married, and left everything to me when he passed. I have been building it up ever since." "It is impressive," Ophelia said honestly. Benjamin pulled the wagon to a stop near the barn. "Let me show you where you will be working." He had set up a workspace for her in a large covered area attached to the barn, complete with a solid anvil, a coal forge that was much better than the makeshift one she had been using, and plenty of space to work. Tools hung neatly on the walls, and there was even a bench with cushions where she could take breaks out of the sun. "I prepared this area when my last farrier was still working here," Benjamin explained. "It has everything you should need, but if something is missing, let me know and I will get it for you." Ophelia ran her hand over the anvil, feeling the cool metal under her palm. "This is perfect, better than perfect. Good." Benjamin glanced toward the corrals where several horses were already gathered. "I brought in the first batch this morning. I figured we would start with the gentlest ones so you can get a feel for the work. Most of my horses are well trained, but there are a few that can be difficult about having their hooves handled." "I can manage difficult horses," Ophelia assured him. "My father always said that 9 times out of 10, a horse acts up because someone has hurt them before. They remember rough treatment." Benjamin nodded approvingly. "My thoughts exactly. I will stay close for the first few horses, just in case you need an extra pair of hands. My men are working the far pastures today, but they will be around later." Ophelia appreciated his thoughtfulness, though part of her wanted to prove that she could handle everything on her own. Still, she was practical enough to know that an extra person could be useful when dealing with a 1,000-pound animal. She got to work, starting with a gentle bay mare that stood patiently while Ophelia examined each hoof. The mare's shoes were indeed overdue for replacement, worn thin in places and starting to shift. Ophelia worked methodically, removing the old shoes, trimming and filing the hooves, checking for any signs of problems, and then fitting new shoes that she heated and shaped to match the mare's specific needs. Benjamin watched without comment, leaning against the fence with his arms crossed. Ophelia was intensely aware of his scrutiny, but she forced herself to focus on the work. This was her chance to prove herself, and she would not waste it by letting nerves make her sloppy. When she finished the mare's 4th hoof and straightened up, Benjamin walked over to inspect her work. He lifted each of the mare's legs in turn, examining the shoes carefully. Ophelia held her breath, waiting for his verdict. "This is excellent work, Miss Thornton," Benjamin said finally, straightening up. "Better than my last farrier, if I am being honest. These shoes are perfectly fitted and properly balanced." Relief and pride flooded through Ophelia in equal measure. "Thank you. My father always said that proper balance was the most important thing. A horse with unbalanced shoes will develop problems eventually, even if the fit seems good at first." "Your father taught you well," Benjamin said, and there was genuine respect in his voice. They worked through the morning, with Ophelia shoeing 6 horses before the heat became too oppressive. Benjamin proved to be helpful without being overbearing, holding horses when needed but otherwise staying out of her way. He also proved to be good company during the brief breaks they took. He talked about his ranch, his plans for expanding his herd, and the challenges of running a cattle operation in California's unpredictable climate. Ophelia found herself relaxing around him, which was unusual. She had spent the last 3 months building walls around herself, protecting against the constant rejection and dismissal. But Benjamin treated her like a skilled professional, asking her opinion about his horses' hoof health and actually listening to her answers. Around noon, Benjamin insisted they break for lunch. He led Ophelia to the ranch house, and she felt a flutter of nervousness about entering his home. But when they stepped inside, she found a clean, practical space that was clearly the domain of a bachelor who valued function over decoration. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large wooden table, a cast iron stove, and several comfortable chairs. "I am not much of a cook," Benjamin admitted, pulling out cold chicken, bread, and cheese from the icebox, "but I can manage the basics." They ate together at the table, and the conversation shifted to more personal topics. Benjamin asked about her father, and Ophelia found herself telling him about growing up in various towns across California, following Thomas Thornton as he traveled to find work. Her mother had died when Ophelia was just 4 years old, killed by a fever that swept through Sacramento one brutal winter, leaving father and daughter to forge their own path together. "He never remarried?" Benjamin asked. Ophelia shook her head. "He said my mother was the only woman he could ever love. He wore his wedding ring until the day he died." She paused, then added quietly, "I think he welcomed death when it came. He missed her so much." "That is the kind of love people write songs about," Benjamin said softly. "The kind that lasts beyond death." "What about you?" Ophelia asked, curious. "Have you ever been married?" Benjamin shook his head. "Never found the right woman. I have been too focused on building up this ranch, I suppose. My mother keeps writing letters asking when I am going to give her grandchildren." He smiled ruefully. "She does not seem to understand that finding a wife is not as simple as buying cattle at auction." Ophelia laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been a long time since she had genuinely laughed at something. "I imagine that would make things much simpler, though I doubt any woman would appreciate being compared to livestock." "Probably not," Benjamin agreed, his eyes crinkling with amusement. After lunch, they returned to work. Ophelia shoed 4 more horses before the day started winding down. Her arms ached from the constant hammering and her back protested from all the bending, but it was a good ache, the satisfaction of hard work well done. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Benjamin drove Ophelia back to town. The wagon wheels creaked rhythmically, and the evening air was beginning to cool, bringing relief from the day's heat. "You did exceptional work today," Benjamin said as they neared Chico. "I would like you to come back the day after tomorrow to finish the rest of the horses. Will that work for you?" "Yes," Ophelia said, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "That will work perfectly." "Good." Benjamin pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the boarding house. "I will pick you up at the same time." As Ophelia climbed down from the wagon, Benjamin added, "Miss Thornton, thank you for giving my horses such excellent care. I can tell you truly love the work." "I do," Ophelia admitted. "It is the only thing I have ever wanted to do." She carried her tool chest inside, feeling lighter than she had in months. The other boarding house residents gave her curious looks, probably wondering where she had been all day, but Ophelia ignored them. Let them wonder. She had work now, real work that used her skills and paid fair wages. For the first time since her father's death, she allowed herself to hope that everything might actually turn out all right. Over the next 2 weeks, Ophelia returned to Benjamin's ranch multiple times to finish shoeing all 23 horses. She fell into a comfortable rhythm, arriving at dawn, working through the day with breaks for lunch and rest, and returning to town in the evening. Benjamin was always there, sometimes helping, sometimes just keeping her company while she worked. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories about their lives and discoveries about their shared values. Ophelia learned that Benjamin had a wry sense of humor that caught her off guard at unexpected moments. He learned that she could curse in 3 languages when a particularly stubborn horse stepped on her foot. They discovered they both loved reading, both preferred coffee to tea, and both had complicated relationships with the concept of religion, believing in something greater but distrusting organized churches. "My mother used to say that God lived in the space between people who cared for each other," Benjamin told her one afternoon while they sat in the shade, taking a break from the heat. "Not in buildings with pews and collection plates." "My father said something similar," Ophelia replied. "He said he saw God more clearly in the honest work of a good farrier than in all the sermons he had ever heard." What surprised Ophelia most was how comfortable she felt around Benjamin. The walls she had built around herself, after months of rejection, began to crumble without her quite noticing. She found herself looking forward to their conversations as much as the work itself, and she caught herself thinking about him at odd moments when she was back in her cramped room at the boarding house. On the day she finished shoeing the last horse, Benjamin paid her in full as promised. $69 in coins and bills that felt impossibly heavy in her hands. Ophelia stared at the money, overwhelmed by the reality of it. "That is a month's wages paid in advance," Benjamin explained. "I will need you back in 4 weeks to start the cycle over again. Shoe mine every single month, like I said. But I was thinking, if you are interested, some of my neighbors have been asking about you. Word has spread that I hired a woman farrier, and a few of them are curious enough to give you a chance, especially after I told them how good your work is." Ophelia looked up from the money to meet his eyes. "You have been recommending me, of course. I told you I would." Benjamin pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I took the liberty of writing down 3 names and directions to their properties. They are all expecting you to stop by if you are interested in taking on more work. Together with my monthly work, you should have more business than you can handle." Ophelia took the paper with trembling hands. This was more than she had dared to hope for, not just one client but the possibility of several, enough to build a real business. "I do not know what to say. Say you will come back next month," Benjamin replied with a small smile. "My horses would miss you otherwise." "Your horses, or you?" The words slipped out before Ophelia could stop them, bold and flirtatious in a way that was entirely unlike her usual careful demeanor. Benjamin's smile widened. "Both, if I am being honest." The air between them seemed to shimmer with something unspoken, a possibility that hung in the summer heat like a promise. Ophelia felt her heart beating faster, felt heat rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. This was dangerous territory, letting herself care about Benjamin as more than an employer, but she found she did not want to step back. "I will come back," she said softly. "Every month for as long as you need me." "I suspect I will need you for a very long time," Benjamin replied, and the weight of meaning in his words made Ophelia's breath catch. The ride back to town that evening felt different, charged with an awareness that had not been there before. Neither of them spoke much, but Benjamin's shoulder brushed against Ophelia's as the wagon bounced over the rough road, and neither of them pulled away. When they reached the boarding house, Benjamin helped Ophelia unload her tools. As she turned to say goodbye, he caught her hand gently. "Miss Thornton, Ophelia, may I be forward for a moment?" Ophelia's heart was hammering now. "Yes. I know it is not proper for me to say this when we have only known each other for 2 weeks, and I know your position is dependent on my goodwill, which makes any declaration of feeling inappropriate at best and coercive at worst. But I need you to know that I value you beyond your skills as a farrier, as exceptional as those are. I value your company, your conversation, your spirit. If circumstances were different, they do not have to be different," Ophelia interrupted, finding her courage. "I value you too, Benjamin. These past 2 weeks have been the happiest I have been since my father died, and that is not just because of the work. It is because of you." Benjamin's expression transformed, hope and joy lighting up his features. "Then may I call on you properly, court you with all due respect and propriety?" "Yes," Ophelia breathed. "Yes, you may." Benjamin lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture both chaste and intimate. "Then I will return tomorrow evening, not as your employer but as a man who would very much like to take you to dinner." Ophelia nodded, not trusting her voice. Benjamin released her hand reluctantly and climbed back onto the wagon. She watched him drive away into the gathering dusk, her hand still tingling from his kiss. That night, for the second time since arriving in Chico, Ophelia could not sleep. But this time it was not anxiety keeping her awake but anticipation, the thrilling knowledge that her life was changing in ways she had never expected. The next evening, Benjamin arrived at the boarding house wearing clean clothes and a nervous expression that Ophelia found endearing. He took her to the nicest restaurant in Chico, a place called the Golden Grill that served steaks and potatoes and had real tablecloths. Other diners stared at them, and Ophelia could practically hear the gossip starting, but she found she did not care. Let them talk. She was having dinner with a good man who valued her mind and her skills, and that was nothing to be ashamed of. They talked through the entire meal, discovering more shared interests and values. Benjamin told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the terror and excitement of his first cattle drive. Ophelia told him about the time she accidentally shoed a horse backward because she had been too distracted by a swarm of bees, and how her father had laughed until tears ran down his face before gently showing her how to fix her mistake. After dinner, they walked slowly through the quiet streets of Chico. The summer night was warm but pleasant, and the stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "I need to be honest with you about something," Benjamin said as they walked. "When I first heard about a woman trying to work as a farrier, I was skeptical. Not because I doubted your abilities, but because I worried that hiring you might cause problems with other ranchers, that they might see it as me making a political statement rather than a practical decision." "What changed your mind?" Ophelia asked. "I met you," Benjamin said simply. "I saw your forge setup, the way you had organized your tools, the wear patterns on your hammer that showed years of use. I could tell immediately that you were the real thing, not someone playing at a trade. And then I thought about my mother, about how many times people told her she could not run a ranch because she was a woman, and how she proved every single one of them wrong. I realized that giving you a chance was not making a statement. It was just the right thing to do." Ophelia felt emotion welling up in her chest. "Your mother sounds like an extraordinary woman." "She is. I wrote to her about you, actually, told her I had hired a woman farrier and that she was the best I had ever seen." "What did she say?" Benjamin grinned. "She said I had better not let you get away, that good farriers are rarer than honest politicians, and I should count myself lucky." "She sounds wise," Ophelia said with a laugh. She is. Terrifying but wise. Benjamin paused, then added more seriously, I also told her that I was developing feelings for you. She said I should be honest about them, that life is too short to waste time dancing around what matters. They had reached the boarding house again. Ophelia turned to face Benjamin, her heart full of feelings that were too big and too new to properly name. I am developing feelings for you too, she said. It scares me, how quickly it is happening. We barely know each other. Time is not always the measure of connection, Benjamin replied. Some people know each other for years and remain strangers. Others meet and recognize something essential in each other right away. He was right. Ophelia had felt that recognition from the first day, a sense that Benjamin understood her in ways that other people did not. He saw her as a whole person, not just a woman trying to do a man's job or a curiosity to be dismissed. May I see you again tomorrow? Benjamin asked. Yes, Ophelia said. And the day after that, and the day after that. Benjamin smiled, and in that moment, Ophelia knew with absolute certainty that she was falling in love with him. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely unexpected, but it was real. Over the next month, Benjamin courted Ophelia with a combination of old-fashioned propriety and genuine affection that made her feel cherished in ways she had never experienced before. He took her to church socials and community dances, to picnics by the Sacramento River and evening walks through town. He introduced her to his friends and advocated for her skills to other ranchers, using his reputation to open doors that had previously been slammed in her face. The other ranchers Benjamin had recommended turned out to be legitimate offers. Ophelia found herself traveling to 3 other properties on a regular basis, building up a client list that kept her busy and solvent. The work was hard, but it was honest and fulfilling, and every morning she woke up grateful that she had not given up during those dark months of rejection. But as wonderful as the work was, it was Benjamin who filled her thoughts most often. The way he laughed at her jokes, the way he listened when she talked about her father, the way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating woman in the world. They stole moments together whenever they could, sitting on his porch after a day's work, sharing coffee and conversation as the sun set over the golden hills. One evening, about 6 weeks after they had met, Benjamin took Ophelia riding out to a place he said was special to him. They rode for almost an hour, climbing into the foothills until they reached a small valley where a creek ran through stands of oak trees. The place was beautiful and peaceful, untouched by the hand of man. I come here when I need to think, Benjamin said as they dismounted. It reminds me that there is more to life than work and worry. They walked beside the creek, their horses following docilely behind them. The water burbled over smooth stones and birds sang in the trees overhead. It felt like they had stepped into a different world, one removed from the dusty reality of ranching and horseshoeing. Ophelia, Benjamin said, stopping and turning to face her. I have been thinking about something for a while now, and I need to know if you feel the same way I do. Ophelia's heart began to race. What is it? I am in love with you, Benjamin said, the words simple and direct. I know it has only been 6 weeks and people will say that is too soon to be sure, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are brilliant and strong and passionate about your work. You make me laugh and you challenge me to be better. When I think about my future, I cannot imagine it without you in it. Ophelia felt tears pricking her eyes. I am in love with you too. I think I have been since that first day when you said you judged people by their skills, not their skirts. Benjamin laughed, a sound of pure joy. He stepped closer and took both of her hands in his. Then marry me, Ophelia. Not right away if you are not ready, but someday. Say you will be my wife and my partner, and that we will build a life together. Ophelia's tears spilled over, but they were tears of happiness. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Benjamin pulled her into his arms, holding her close. They stood like that for a long moment, listening to the creak and the birds and the beating of each other's hearts. Then Benjamin pulled back slightly and leaned down to kiss her. It was Ophelia's first real kiss, sweet and gentle and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling so widely their faces hurt. "My mother is going to be insufferably smug when I tell her," Benjamin said. "She predicted this would happen." "How could she predict it? She has never even met me." "I told you, she is terrifying in her wisdom." Benjamin kissed Ophelia's forehead. "But she is also kind, and I know she will love you. Everyone who matters will love you." They stayed in the valley until the sun began to set, making plans and dreaming about their future. Benjamin wanted to expand his ranch and train horses in addition to raising cattle. Ophelia wanted to build a proper farrier shop on the property, a place where she could take on apprentices and pass along the skills her father had taught her. They talked about children, both agreeing that they wanted a house full of them, boys and girls who would grow up knowing that their worth was not determined by their gender, but by their character and their choices. When they finally rode back to town, darkness had fallen and stars filled the sky above them. Benjamin left Ophelia at the boarding house with a lingering kiss and a promise to return the next day. Ophelia floated up the stairs to her room, feeling like her feet barely touched the ground. She was engaged. She was going to marry Benjamin Xavier, the man who had given her a chance when no one else would, who had seen her value and her potential. The man she loved with every fiber of her being. They decided to wait 3 months before marrying, wanting to give themselves time to be certain and to make proper arrangements. Benjamin wrote to his mother, who responded with a letter full of congratulations and plans to come visit for the wedding. Ophelia had no family of her own to invite, but Benjamin's family seemed determined to adopt her as one of their own. During those 3 months, Ophelia continued to build her business while spending every possible moment with Benjamin. Her reputation as a skilled farrier spread, and she found herself with more work than she could handle. She hired a young man named Peter as an apprentice, a 17-year-old who had been working in a stable and dreamed of learning a real trade. Peter was initially skeptical about learning from a woman, but Ophelia's skill quickly won him over. "You are better than any farrier I have ever seen," Peter told her one day after watching her diagnose and treat a horse with a complicated hoof abscess. "Man or woman, it does not matter. You just know horses." Ophelia felt a surge of pride at his words. This was what she had always wanted, to be judged by her work, not her gender. Benjamin had given her that chance, and now she was building something real and lasting. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning, with the heat of summer finally broken and the air carrying a hint of the coming autumn. They married in a small church in Chico, with about 50 guests in attendance. Benjamin's mother, Martha Xavier, had indeed made the journey from Texas, and she proved to be as formidable and wonderful as Benjamin had described. She was a tall woman in her late 50s with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "You are exactly what my son needs," Martha told Ophelia the day before the wedding. "Someone with spine and skill and sense. Do not let him get too comfortable, you hear me? Keep him on his toes." "I will do my best," Ophelia promised, charmed by the older woman's directness. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. Ophelia wore a dress of ivory silk that Benjamin had insisted on buying for her, though she had protested the expense. Benjamin wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable, tugging at his collar as if he was not used to such formal clothing. When the minister asked them to exchange vows, Benjamin looked into Ophelia's eyes and spoke from his heart. Ophelia, you came into my life when I least expected it, and you changed everything. You showed me what courage looks like, what determination can accomplish, and what love feels like. I promise to support your dreams, to value your skills, and to stand beside you as an equal partner in all things. I promise to love you for all the days of my life. Ophelia's voice trembled as she spoke her own vows. Benjamin, you gave me a chance when no one else would. You saw me not as a woman trying to do a man's work, but as a skilled farrier who deserved respect. You taught me that love is not about changing who you are, but finding someone who celebrates who you are. I promise to work beside you, to build a life with you, and to love you with everything I have. When they kissed as husband and wife, the small church erupted in applause. Ophelia felt joy radiating through every part of her body, a happiness so complete it almost frightened her with its intensity. The celebration afterward was held at Benjamin's ranch, which was now Ophelia's home too. Long tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food that the neighboring ranchers and their wives had contributed. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Ophelia found herself pulled into conversations with people who had previously ignored her or dismissed her. Now that she was Benjamin's wife, they seemed willing to accept her, though Ophelia knew that her skills had played a role too. She had proven herself through hard work and quality results, and that counted for something even in this traditional community. As the sun set and the party continued, Benjamin pulled Ophelia away from the crowd and led her to the porch of their home. They sat together on the steps, watching the celebration and listening to the music. "Happy?" Benjamin asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Ophelia replied honestly. 6 months ago I was alone and desperate, convinced that I would never find work or build a life. And now look at me. I have a thriving business, a wonderful husband, and a future full of possibilities. "We have a future full of possibilities," Benjamin corrected gently. "Everything I have is yours now. We are partners in all things." Ophelia leaned her head against his shoulder. "I love you, Benjamin Xavier." "I love you too, Ophelia Xavier." The name sent a thrill through her. Ophelia Xavier. She was no longer alone, no longer fighting against the world by herself. She had Benjamin, and together they would build something extraordinary. The first year of their marriage was full of adjustments and discoveries. Ophelia moved her farrier business fully onto the ranch property, and Benjamin helped her build a proper shop with space for all her equipment and room to work even in bad weather. She continued to take on clients from throughout the area, and her reputation continued to grow. Peter proved to be an excellent apprentice, learning quickly and showing genuine talent for the trade. Benjamin expanded his cattle operation and began training horses as he had planned. He had a gift for working with difficult animals, a patience and intuition that Ophelia found fascinating to watch. They worked side by side, supporting each other's dreams and celebrating each other's successes. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, talking about their day and making plans for the future. Sometimes Benjamin would play the harmonica that had belonged to his father, and Ophelia would sing songs her own father had taught her. They were building traditions of their own, creating a life that honored the past while embracing the future. Their first winter together was mild by California standards, but there were still days when the work was hard and the weather unpleasant. On those days, they would sit by the fire, reading together or simply enjoying each other's company. Ophelia had never known such contentment, such a sense of being exactly where she was supposed to be. In the spring, Ophelia realized she was pregnant. She told Benjamin one morning over breakfast, watching nervously for his reaction. They had talked about wanting children, but the reality of it was both exciting and terrifying. Benjamin's face lit up like the sun. "Truly, you are certain as I can be," Ophelia said. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday when I went to town." Benjamin crossed to her in 2 long strides and lifted her into his arms, spinning her around. "We are going to have a baby. Ophelia, we are going to have a baby," Ophelia laughed, her nervousness evaporating in the face of his joy. "Put me down before you make me dizzy." Benjamin set her down gently but kept his arms around her. "Are you happy about it?" "Terrified," Ophelia admitted. "But yes, happy, so very happy." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Ophelia insisted on continuing to work for as long as she could. Benjamin worried, but he also understood that idleness would drive her mad. They compromised, with Ophelia scaling back her work and taking on only the easiest jobs while Peter handled the more demanding clients. Martha Xavier arrived 2 weeks before the baby was due, determined to be there for the birth of her first grandchild. She immediately took charge of preparing the house, cooking meals, and generally making herself indispensable. Ophelia found herself grateful for the older woman's presence, especially as the final days of pregnancy grew uncomfortable. The baby came on a warm day in November, almost exactly a year after Ophelia and Benjamin had married. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through an entire night and into the next morning. Benjamin stayed by Ophelia's side the entire time, holding her hand and offering encouragement even when she cursed him for putting her in this situation. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and screaming his displeasure at the world, Ophelia felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Benjamin cradled the tiny infant with surprising gentleness, tears running down his face. "He is perfect," Benjamin whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Ophelia's father, with James as a middle name after Benjamin's uncle who had left him the ranch. Little Thomas Xavier was a healthy baby with his father's strong lungs and his mother's stubborn determination. From the very beginning, he made his wants known and refused to be ignored. Martha stayed for 6 weeks after the birth, helping with the baby and running the household while Ophelia recovered. During that time, Ophelia came to love her mother-in-law deeply, appreciating the woman's wisdom and her no-nonsense approach to life. "You have done well for yourself," Martha told Ophelia one evening while they sat together watching Benjamin play with his son. "My boy is happy, truly happy, and that is all a mother can ask for." "He has made me happy too," Ophelia said. "I never thought I could have this, a home and a family and work that fulfills me. For a long time, I thought I would have to choose between being a farrier and having a normal life." "Normal is overrated," Martha said with a snort. "You and Benjamin have something better than normal. You have a partnership built on respect and love. That is worth more than all the normal in the world." After Martha returned to Texas, Ophelia and Benjamin settled into the rhythms of life with a newborn. It was exhausting and overwhelming and absolutely wonderful. Ophelia had worried that motherhood might mean giving up her work, but Benjamin proved to be a devoted father who had no problem watching Thomas while Ophelia was in the shop. They traded off responsibilities, both contributing to the household and the business in whatever ways were needed. As Thomas grew from an infant to a toddler, Ophelia gradually returned to taking on more clients. Peter had developed into a skilled farrier in his own right, and together they could handle more work than Ophelia had ever managed alone. The business thrived, and Ophelia found herself training 2 more apprentices. A young woman named Sarah who reminded Ophelia of herself, and another young man named Robert who had a gift for working with difficult horses. The fact that Ophelia was training a female apprentice raised eyebrows in the community. But by this point, Ophelia's reputation was solid enough that most people kept their objections to themselves. Sarah proved to be even more talented than Peter, with an intuitive understanding of hoof mechanics that impressed even Ophelia. "You remind me of myself at your age," Ophelia told Sarah one day, determined to prove that women can do this work just as well as men. "Better than men in some cases," Sarah said with a grin. Present company excluded Peter. Peter, who had become something of a brother figure to both women, just rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "I know when I am outmatched." Time passed in a blur of work and family and happiness. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who loved horses and begged to be allowed in the farrier shop, even though he was too young to do more than watch. Benjamin's ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the area. Ophelia's farrier business expanded until she had a roster of regular clients that stretched across 3 counties. When Thomas was 3 years old, Ophelia found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose Margaret, arrived on a spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming across the California hills. She was a quieter baby than Thomas had been, more content to observe the world around her with serious dark eyes. 2 years after Rose came another son, whom they named David Franklin. David proved to be the wild child of the family, constantly climbing things and getting into trouble from the moment he could crawl. Benjamin joked that they would need to build higher fences to contain him. With 3 children and a thriving business, life was full and busy. Ophelia sometimes looked back on that desperate woman who had been trying to find work in a shed behind a boarding house and marveled at how much had changed. She had everything she had ever wanted and things she had not dared to dream about. The children grew up surrounded by horses and hard work, learning early that their mother's job was just as important as their father's. Thomas showed a natural talent for farrier work and began apprenticing with his mother when he turned 14. Rose proved to have her father's gift for training horses, able to gentle even the most fractious animals. David, true to his wild nature, announced that he wanted to be a rodeo rider, giving both his parents gray hairs. Through it all, Ophelia and Benjamin's love for each other only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course, the inevitable conflicts that arise when 2 strong-willed people share a life. But they had learned how to communicate, how to compromise, and how to remember what truly mattered. One evening, about 15 years after their wedding, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. The children were inside doing their schoolwork, and for a rare moment they had peace and quiet. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked suddenly. Ophelia looked at him in surprise. "Regret what?" "Marrying me. Building this life. You could have gone to a big city, opened a shop there where people might have been more progressive. Instead, you stayed in Chico with a stubborn rancher who asked you to shoe his horses every single month." Ophelia reached over and took his hand. "Benjamin Xavier, I have never regretted a single moment of our life together. Yes, I could have gone to San Francisco or Sacramento, but I would not have found you there, and you are worth more than all the success in the world. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You saw me for who I was and valued my skills. You loved me not despite my determination to work as a farrier, but because of it. How could I possibly regret that?" Benjamin lifted her hand and kissed it, just as he had done that day 15 years ago when he had first declared his feelings. "I am the lucky one, you know. I found a brilliant, beautiful, stubborn woman who makes the best horseshoes in California and gives me beautiful children and keeps me honest. I thank God for you every single day." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the sun sink below the hills. The life they had built together was not always easy, but it was real and solid and filled with love. That was all that mattered. As the years continued to pass, Ophelia and Benjamin watched their children grow into capable adults. Thomas took over more and more of the farrier business, eventually becoming his mother's full partner. He married Sarah, Ophelia's former apprentice, and they had 3 children of their own. The irony of training her future daughter-in-law was not lost on Ophelia, but she could not have chosen a better wife for her son. Rose married a neighboring rancher and combined her talent for horse training with his cattle operation, creating one of the most successful ranches in Northern California. She had 2 children and managed to balance motherhood with her career just as her mother had done. David, true to his word, spent several years on the rodeo circuit before a bad fall convinced him to settle down. He opened a stable in town where he trained horses and taught riding lessons, finally channeling his wild energy into something productive. He married late, at 32, to a teacher named Emma who somehow managed to keep him grounded. Through all of this, Ophelia continued to work. Even as she moved into her 40s and then her 50s, she remained active in the farrier business, though she took on fewer clients and spent more time teaching than doing the physical work herself. Her reputation had grown to the point where farriers from across California would come to learn from her, and she had trained dozens of apprentices over the years, both men and women. Benjamin's hair turned gray, and lines etched themselves around his eyes from years of squinting into the California sun. But he remained strong and vital, still running his ranch with the same dedication he had shown as a young man. He and Ophelia were grandparents now, and they delighted in spoiling their grandchildren just as grandparents were supposed to do one day. A young woman showed up at the ranch asking to speak with Ophelia. She was perhaps 19 or 20, with nervous eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. "My name is Elizabeth," she said. "I have been trying to find work as a farrier for 6 months, and no one will hire me. But then I heard about you, about how you built a successful business even though you are a woman. I was hoping you might take me on as an apprentice." Ophelia looked at the young woman and saw herself 30 years earlier, desperate and determined and willing to do whatever it took to pursue her passion. She smiled and said, "Let me see your tool kit." Elizabeth showed Ophelia her tools, which were well maintained and properly organized. They talked for an hour, with Ophelia asking technical questions and Elizabeth answering with growing confidence. By the end of the conversation, Ophelia knew she had found another talented apprentice. "I will take you on," Ophelia said. "The work is hard and the hours are long, but if you are truly committed, I will teach you everything I know." Elizabeth's face lit up with joy and relief. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." "Oh, I think I do," Ophelia said with a knowing smile. "I have been exactly where you are." That evening, Ophelia told Benjamin about her new apprentice. They were sitting on the porch, as they did almost every evening, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. "You are changing the world, you know," Benjamin said. "Every woman you train, every person you teach that gender does not determine worth or ability. That is changing the world. One horseshoe at a time," Ophelia said with a laugh. "That is all I can do." "It is enough," Benjamin assured her. "More than enough." As they sat together, Ophelia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From that desperate day, when she had been hammering out horseshoes in a shed behind a boarding house, to this evening, when she sat beside the love of her life on the porch of their home, surrounded by the evidence of everything they had built together. It had not been an easy path, but it had been worth every struggle, every setback, every moment of doubt. She thought about that first day when Benjamin had appeared at her shed and told her he would hire her, that he wanted her to shoe his horses every single month. That decision had changed everything, not just because it gave her work, but because it led her to the love of her life. Benjamin had seen her value when no one else would, and that act of faith had blossomed into a lifetime of love and partnership. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink. Benjamin reached over and took Ophelia's hand, and she squeezed back, a silent communication of love that needed no words. "Thank you," Ophelia said softly. "For what?" Benjamin asked. "For taking a chance on me all those years ago. For seeing past what everyone else saw and recognizing who I really was. For loving me not despite my dreams but because of them. For building this life with me." Benjamin brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I should be thanking you. You made me better than I was. You taught me what real courage looks like, and you gave me a life more wonderful than anything I could have imagined." They sat together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other against the odds and built something extraordinary together. Their story had started with rejection and desperation, with a woman who refused to give up on her dreams and a man who was willing to look past society's expectations. It had grown into a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of recognition and respect and partnership. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren playing, the sound of the next generation carrying on the legacy that Ophelia and Benjamin had built. Thomas was teaching his oldest daughter how to properly trim a hoof, passing along the knowledge that had been passed to him. Rose was planning a trip to visit with her family. David had stopped by earlier with stories of his latest batch of riding students. The business Ophelia had started in desperation had become a family legacy, carried on by her children and apprentices. The ranch Benjamin had inherited had grown into one of the most respected operations in Northern California. But more than any of that, they had built a family founded on love and respect, and the radical belief that people should be judged by their character and abilities rather than their gender. As full darkness fell and the air grew cool, Benjamin and Ophelia finally went inside, their hands still clasped. They had been married for over 30 years now, and Ophelia still felt a thrill when Benjamin looked at her with love in his eyes. Some things never changed, and that was one of them. They prepared for bed, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of decades together. When they finally lay down, Benjamin pulled Ophelia close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Ophelia Xavier," Benjamin murmured into the darkness. "I love you too, Benjamin Xavier," Ophelia replied. "Every single day more than the day before." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found their perfect match. Outside, the California night stretched vast and beautiful over the land they had claimed as their own. The horses were settled in their stalls, their hooves properly shod and cared for. The cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures. Everything was as it should be. Years continued to pass, bringing with them the inevitable changes that time brings. Ophelia and Benjamin moved into their 60s, then their 70s, watching as their grandchildren grew up and started families of their own. They became great-grandparents, marveling at the expanding family tree that had started with two people who had taken a chance on each other in the summer of 1882. Thomas fully took over the farrier business, running it with his wife Sarah, and training the next generation of apprentices. The business had grown beyond anything Ophelia could have imagined in those early desperate days, with multiple farriers working under the family name, and a reputation that stretched across the entire state. Rose's horse training operation had become famous throughout California, with people coming from as far away as Los Angeles to buy horses she had trained. She had inherited her mother's determination and her father's intuition with animals, creating a combination that made her remarkably successful. David, despite his wild youth, had become a pillar of the community, serving on the town council and using his stable as a place to teach disadvantaged children how to ride and care for horses. He had found his calling in helping others, channeling his energy into making a difference. Ophelia finally retired from active farrier work in her late 60s, though she continued to consult and teach for several more years. Her hands, which had shaped thousands of horseshoes over the decades, were finally allowed to rest. She and Benjamin spent their days enjoying the ranch, reading together, and taking slow walks through the land they had spent a lifetime building up. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren filled the house and yard, a testament to the love that Ophelia and Benjamin had built. There was food and music and laughter, and at one point Benjamin stood up to make a speech. 40 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, I met a woman who was trying to work as a farrier in a world that told her women could not do that kind of work. I hired her to shoe my horses every single month, thinking I was just getting a good farrier. But what I actually found was my best friend, my partner, my love, and the mother of my children. Ophelia, you have made every day of these 40 years an adventure. Thank you for saying yes to that scared cowboy who showed up at your shed all those years ago. Ophelia stood and joined him, taking his hand. Thank you for giving me a chance when no one else would. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me and valuing what you saw. Thank you for 40 years of love and laughter and partnership. I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. They kissed, and the assembled family cheered and applauded. Looking out at all the faces before them, Ophelia felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built. Every person gathered here was part of their legacy, proof that taking a chance on love and defying society's expectations could lead to something beautiful and lasting. Eventually, as happens to all people who live long enough, Benjamin and Ophelia began to slow down. Their bodies, which had served them so well for so many years, began to fail them in small ways. Benjamin developed arthritis in his knees. Ophelia's eyesight began to fade. But through it all, they remained devoted to each other, caring for each other with the same tenderness they had shown from the very beginning. On a warm summer evening, much like the one when they had first met over 50 years earlier, Benjamin and Ophelia sat together on their porch. They were both in their 80s now, their hair white and their movements slow, but the love between them burned as brightly as ever. You remember that first day? Benjamin asked. When I came to your shed and asked you to work for me. I remember thinking you were too good to be true, Ophelia said with a smile. I kept waiting for you to reveal some ulterior motive. My only motive was getting my horses properly shod, Benjamin said. Everything else was just a wonderful bonus. The best bonus, Ophelia agreed. I got work, a home, a family, and the love of my life, all because you were willing to give me a chance. Benjamin reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. We gave each other a chance. That is what made it work. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and gold. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and well-maintained by the family they had raised. In the distance, they could hear Thomas calling out instructions to one of the younger farriers. From the horse training paddock came Rose's voice, patient and firm as she worked with a skittish mare. Somewhere in town, David was probably teaching an evening riding lesson. Everything they had built would continue after they were gone. That knowledge brought Ophelia a deep sense of peace. They had created something lasting, something meaningful, something that would ripple forward through generations. "I love you, Benjamin Xavier," Ophelia said, the words as true now as they had been 50 years ago. "I love you too, Ophelia Xavier," Benjamin replied. "Every single day of our lives together has been a gift." They sat together watching the stars emerge, two people who had found each other against the odds and built a love story that would be told and retold in their family for generations to come. A story about courage and respect, about taking chances and defying expectations, about a woman who refused to give up on her dreams, and a man who recognized her worth. The summer night grew cool around them, but they stayed on the porch a while longer, savoring the moment. In the morning, there would be work to do and family to see and life to live. But for now, there was just the two of them, hand in hand, hearts beating in rhythm. Two souls who had recognized each other from the very beginning and chosen to build something extraordinary together. Benjamin Xavier had walked into Ophelia Thornton's life on a hot summer day in 1882 and offered her work when no one else would. He had asked her to shoe his horses every single month, and in doing so, had given her not just a livelihood but a future. And Ophelia had taken that chance, had proven her worth, and had found love in the most unexpected place. It was a simple story in some ways, just two people meeting and falling in love. But it was also a revolutionary story, a testament to what could happen when someone was willing to look past society's restrictions and see another person's true worth. Benjamin had given Ophelia the chance to prove herself, and she had exceeded every expectation. Together they had built a life that honored both of their dreams, that valued partnership and equality long before those concepts became commonplace. As the night deepened, and the stars shone brighter, Benjamin and Ophelia finally rose from their chairs and made their way inside. They moved slowly, helping each other over the threshold they had crossed together so many times before. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, new joys. But tonight, they would simply rest in the comfort of their home and their love, secure in the knowledge that they had lived a life worth living and loved a love worth having. The Wild West of their youth had long since been tamed, replaced by progress and civilization. But the spirit of those early days lived on in the choices they had made, in the courage they had shown, in the love they had built despite all the obstacles in their path. And that spirit would continue to live on through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, inspiring future generations to be brave enough to defy expectations and wise enough to recognize love when it appeared. Benjamin and Ophelia Xavier lay down together in the bed they had shared for over 50 years. And as they drifted off to sleep, they both smiled, content in the knowledge that their story had been extraordinary. It had started with a simple offer to shoe horses every single month, and it had grown into a legacy of love that would last forever.